Kanye West versus Metro Boomin, two great producers from two different eras. But what happened when both flipped the exact same sample? Well, today we're putting their beats side by side to see who came out on top. You're about to see a side of their genius that's never been shown before. So let's settle this once and for all and find out who sampled it better. In this video, we're going to break down how both of these producers made beats using the exact same sample, the different sampling techniques they used, and even some ideas that you can use for your own beats. So let's start off by looking at the sample itself.
Am I wrong to fall in love, so deeply in love with you?
This is a blues record from the 70s, but what's interesting is that even though both producers used the exact same parts of the sample, what they made was drastically different. First, we'll look at Metro Boomin's beat from when he used the sample way back in 2014 for Travis Scott's Mamacita.
Mamacita, cita, cita.
Personally, this is one of my favorite Travis Scott songs. In fact, he recently posted a picture of all the producers making this beat. You can see Metro's on the left, DJ Dahi, who co-produced, is on the right side sitting down, and there's Travis standing in the middle. But as you may have noticed, there is a mysterious fourth person in this picture. So who is this person? Well, as per DJ Dahi, this is actually Diddy. The Mamacita beat was originally made for Diddy at his house, but apparently Diddy just didn't like the beat. Maybe he just had a hard time hearing the beat because of all the oiled up men screaming from his basement. Either way, let's break down how this beat was made. First, let's load this into a sampler, and this here is the piece that gets used over and over. Nothing too complex in terms of sampling technique, no manipulations done, the sample even gets used at its natural pitch and speed. But it's the layering done around the sample that's most impressive to me in this beat. Let me show you how this is done. Now, as you probably know, if you want to layer your own sounds alongside a sample, knowing which notes are actually in your sample is going to be super helpful, which is exactly what I'm doing here. This is my plugin Note Grabber, which shows you every single note inside of your sample and even lets you grab them for your own beat. And so you can see here inside of this window, this is showing us that the main dominant note from that guitar within the sample is playing a D sharp. So now that we know what note to start with, let's look at how the layers around the sample get built. The first layer that gets added into this beat is a piano. And here is how this pattern gets built that works perfectly with the sample. We start with that D sharp, again the note that's from the sample, and a minor chord gets built using it. So we go up 3 semitones, and then we go up another 4 semitones. From here, the same notes get used for the rest of the pattern. We go from this chord to single notes. We have an F sharp and then down to a D sharp. And then finally, for one last change, this chord gets inverted, meaning this top note gets pushed all the way down an octave. So here is what we get as the first layer around our sample. But there is one thing that is actually wrong with this pattern. Let me show you what that is. If I played this layer alongside my sample, take a close listen. It sounds off. So why is this happening? Well, earlier when I said that the main note in the sample is a D sharp, I was half wrong. Let's go back into Note Grabber and play the sample again. Now here's where things get interesting. If I go to D sharp and draw in this note, you can see the actual note within the sample is slightly above this perfect D sharp. So you might be thinking, well, if this note is higher than a D sharp, that must mean that it's an E, one note higher on the keyboard. Well, again, take a look. If I drag this note up to be a perfect E, the note within the sample is now slightly below an E. So what does this mean? Well, this means that the sample isn't pitch perfect. The main guitar note in the sample is actually somewhere in between a D sharp and an E. And this is why I say it's helpful to see all of the details within your samples. Because if you tried relying on an automated pitch detection tool, it's just gonna tell you that this is a D sharp. Same thing if I tried using an automated audio to MIDI tool. It's also just gonna give me a D sharp. So if you ever run into a problem where it seems like any note you try playing along with your sample just doesn't work, even though every tool is telling you what that right note is, this might be why. And so by having all of the information that's actually accurate, you can make better decisions and produce better beats, and that's exactly why I built Note Grabber. Again, you can download and try this plugin for free for 14 days, but you can always just try doing this by ear as well. Anyways, back to our piano. So how do we fix this problem? Well, we go into the tune knob and increase it by a fraction. So now our D sharp note is playing somewhere in between a D sharp and an E, which matches exactly what's happening in the sample. And as you can hear, it sounds better. Compared to how it originally sounded before. Now beyond the piano, there is some more layering done. We also have this faint swelling string in the beat. And as you can see, again, this is also repitched slightly up as well. Then from here, we have the drums. Now, before we break the drums down, I'm going to make an educated guess here and say that DJ Dahi was the one that came up with the drums for this beat. The reason why is because this drum pattern is just absolutely insane, and DJ Dahi is one of my favorite producers because insane ideas is what is his forte. So first, we start off with this typical hi-hat pattern after EQing the sample, nothing too wild so far. We have this snare on the 3 and the 7, along with a kick and an 808. But this last piece of the drum pattern is where, in my opinion, a lot of the personality for this beat comes from. This straightforward percussion sound here gets used to build this wild pattern. The amount of layering, pitch control, rhythm shifting, and overall insanity is truly impressive to me. That is a wild pattern. But what's also interesting about this beat overall is that DJ Dahi, the co-producer of this beat, said he wasn't even too excited about this beat either. But it's like he says, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And that is how Mamacita was made. Next up, let's look at Kanye's beat using this exact same sample, also made in 2014 for Pusha T's Nostalgia.
Chicago tried to fight the urge like Ivan Drago. If he dies, he dies.
Now this beat, just like Mamacita, has multiple producers credited on it. We have Knots, Kanye West, and Twilight Tone. And this one, just like the last beat, is a bit hard to know who did what. I can make an educated guess a little bit later, but first let's just look at how this beat was actually made. Once again, the sample is loaded up in my sampler, but this time it's pitched up 6 semitones. And here is the pattern that gets built. Now, one thing that I want to point out that can be a useful technique for producers is right here. As you can see, we have these 2 chops here and here. But as you may have noticed, these are actually the same chop from the sample. The difference is that the second chop is just pitched down 5 semitones. This is a great technique to introduce more musicality into your beat. Repitching isolated chops to create your own musical pattern can help you build your own musical ideas within your beat using extremely limited samples. But so far with our breakdown, you may have noticed that this beat sounds different from the actual final beat. Well, it's because there's more manipulation done to this sample. When you listen to what we have so far, you can hear that there are 2 guitars in the sample. One panned far right and another panned far left. Well, in the final beat, only the guitar on the right side gets used. So to do this, I'm going to use a stock stereo separator. This will let me turn down the volume of what's in the left channel and push the right channel more towards the middle. And that is how the sample gets used for the beat. Beyond the actual sample, we have some additional layers, some rhythmic ideas to fill out the beat even more. We have this percussive sound being used instead of traditional snares. Instead of traditional hip hop kicks getting used, the more minimal subdued kicks from the actual sample get used after some bass boosting and some EQing, along with this subby kick that comes in sporadically every once in a while. And then finally, we have this last percussive sounds that helps fill up the beat even more. You'll notice how off-grid these notes are. If these were perfectly quantized, this beat just feels like it loses a lot of its personality. And so now the question of who did what on this beat. Well, in an interview, Pusha T actually talks about this beat and how it came about because he wanted to work with Virginia legends like Nottz on this album. So this leads me to believe that the core idea of this beat was built by Nottz. Now I would guess Kanye's contribution is how stripped down the beat is. My guess is that the original beat may have had more traditional hip hop sounds in it as well as a more full sample, and that Kanye chose to minimize all these ideas, but again, this is just my guess. Having said that, as good as both of these beats are, how about I see if I can make a legendary beat myself? Let's see what happens if I try turning the sample into my own beat. I will most likely make a boob of myself trying to compete with these legends, but hey, maybe not. Let's open up FL Studio, but I'm gonna do something different this time. If you've watched my videos before, this is often the step where I'll open up my sampler and add my sample in. But this time I'm gonna take a different approach to this sample that you can try using too. I'm gonna open up a synth called Pigments and go into the presets. And under template, I'm gonna choose this granular preset here. And this is gonna let me do a sampling technique called granular synthesis. This is basically where the plugin will chop this sample up into tons of micro chops and then piece them all together in really unique and different ways. Lots of DAWs have stock plugins that let you do this, so you don't need Pigments to do this, by the way. Anyways, back to this beat, I'm gonna drag in my sample. And now you can hear when I play just a single note, it gives me all of these different interesting ideas that sound very different from the sample itself. In fact, this kind of feels like a sample that would fit a French house song, which is a genre I have no idea how to make, but hey, let's just see what happens. I'm gonna record this new version of the sample, and this is the piece that I will bring into my sampler. And so by using this new manipulated version of the sample, I'm gonna try to put a loop together. Now let's start building around this loop and start going towards that more house feel. To do this, I will create a 4 on the floor kick pattern. Next, let's bring in a snare. And I will play my hi-hats in by hand to introduce some fun sloppiness into the beat. At this point, the song definitely feels like it needs some low end at this point. So I'll grab this bass guitar here and create a very simple pattern. And once again, thanks to Note Grabber, which again you can download and try for free, I know that this sample is not perfectly tuned. So as you can see, I tuned up this guitar half a semitone. Now I think making this bass sound a bit more acidy, kind of like that 90s Daft Punk feel would be a cool idea. So I'll grab this slightly growly synth bass here, and I'll add some distortion to it. And I'll play this layer along with my bass. And at this point, I'm gonna add a few little bit more details, a little bit more extra percussion. And I'll bring in this final synth lead to come in for the hook section. So that's 3 very different beats using the exact same sample. Let me know which beat you enjoyed most in the comments below. Did I make a fool of myself? I hope not. And make sure to check out Note Grabber right next to me. If you use samples, this plugin is a no-brainer that you need in your arsenal. Hit like and subscribe as well while you're at it. And other than that, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.